Welcome everyone to an interview video. We have our guest here, Tone, from the RTR Imperium Surrectum or RIS team. He's the lead artist, unit maker, the mod father, as he is called in some circles. Of course, famous from the Roma Surrectum era of Rome Total War mod making. So, Tone, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us, and please introduce yourself.
Hey, thank you. I'm Tone. I've been involved in Rome Total War modding since 2007. I got involved in the early phases of Roma Surrectum, having played a couple of other mods before that. I loved what DVK was doing with the Roma Surrectum mod and thought, I want to join it. That was my first sort of adventure into graphics and 3D. And it was a lot of fun. We spent probably 3 years developing Roma Surrectum 2. I did most of the unit modeling for that. A lot of modeling stuff from scratch, a lot of texturing from scratch. Got joined by a couple of really sort of talented graphic artists to help finish that off. And then basically retired from the modding scene in 2013, but kind of got tempted back into modding again by Ahal and some of the other guys that got involved in the RTR Imperium Surrectum. And it's this idea that we could join forces of the Roma Surrectum team and the RTR team and create something that was really quite exciting. And I don't think we really realised at that point what the extent of the modability of the new remastered platform would be at that point. So, it's been an exciting journey.
Right, absolutely. I mean, the magnitude of the mods now with all the lifted limits, the faction limits, unit limits, model limits, building limits. It's just the scripting that can do all kinds of things now. It's pretty unprecedented for sure. And now, of course, with the map, not that they lifted any limits with that, but they, as far as I know, but they fixed some side bugs, and now all of a sudden we've got this map that's 4 times larger than almost any other map ever made for Rome Total War. So that's pretty all incredible stuff.
Yeah.
And of course,
it's pretty insane, really, and it just goes to show how sort of into modding the Feral team are. They totally understand the needs of modders, and we're really grateful for the way that they've just lifted those limits and listened to us through the whole development process. As they, after they'd released the first release, they worked very closely with a lot of us modders to understand what our requirements were. So some of the things like the unit variation stuff came through feedback from us. We sort of begged them to add that, and it was very much a last minute thing just before they wrapped up their development work, and various other bits. They've just listened to what people want and worked very closely.
Right, absolutely. I totally forgot about the unit variation things that were unlocked with the various models, because of course Rome Remastered has its own variation system, right, with the included ethnicity system. Right. But now, because of, speaking with you guys, they made it so that in the EDU file you can specify multiple models in one unit. How many models was it per unit?
So you can basically specify 7 models per unit.
Yeah, I think about
but
7,
also
which is a pretty high number.
Upgrade levels. It's enough for units to look sufficiently varied, and as I said, that's also for each armor upgrade level. So you could potentially have a unit that's being upgraded in the armory or whatever the process of retraining happens is, and you'll end up with a lot more variety as well. And then you add in the ethnicity and the other sort of variables, and you can potentially end up with a huge number of different unit models per unit variant.
Right, absolutely. And many, I believe the officer limit was also raised by several. And I remember Roma Surrectum has, of course, your pretty incredible officers. I remember them as well. So that is nice too.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun with those Hellenistic officers and some of the other ones like the Roman, the horn player for the Romans and a lot of the Vexillarius, those the Roman banner carriers. So that was a lot of fun putting those together. So I think even more scope now with Rome Remastered. I think it's up to 10. It's 9 or 10 variants per unit.
Right, that's
So yeah,
crazy.
exciting
That's
stuff.
something we never would have thought possible back in the Roma Surrectum days, for sure. Um,
No.
yeah, so at first, when the first few versions of Imperium Surrectum came out, and I mean, until now, there are a lot of ported units, of course, from Rome Total War and from Roma Surrectum, and I believe just from RS, if I'm not mistaken. So, if I mean, I know about this process of porting units from Chivalry, but was it easy to figure out initially how to port units, and what did you think of that process?
Yeah, so it was relatively straightforward. It took maybe a few days to work out things like the PBR. I remember the first time that I put a unit into it, and it looked completely, what was a quite nice looking unit from Roma Surrectum. I think it was the Praetorian Cavalry or something.
Right.
Put those in, and it just looked really weird and blocky, and we didn't really understand what was required. And of course, the thing that was missing was the PBR texture. So that's the physical base rendering texture. So things like the normal, the metalness, and the roughness. And then realised that we could put a generic sort of grey texture in as that, and it would suddenly look good. Um, so that was it was actually quite an easy process. The other thing that we had that I had to kind of get my head around was how to make it work without all these different ethnicity variants. So there's a
Mhm.
bit of questioning of Edwin from the Feral team and some of his guys about okay, so what do we need to make this work? But then after that, it was quite straightforward, and we found that we could bring across the unit models really easily. I got one of the guys in the team to do the upscaling using an AI upscaler for the texturing. We found that because we did a lot of the Roma Surrectum textures at 512 pixels square,
Mhm.
so they translated reasonably well up to 2K. Whereas quite a lot of the original Rome Total War textures were 256 pixels. In other
Right.
words, 4 times less definition if you think it's double in each of the X and Y axes. So yeah, it was really quite fun when we saw some of the units coming in, and they were actually looking quite good in the new engine, particularly with the lighting and so on. So that was really good fun.
Yeah, I
Um,
think a couple things you touched on there that are a little bit intimidating when people first open up the Rome Remastered files are in terms of the code, the ethnicity system looks very intimidating. Uh, I think for a
yeah,
lot of
and I
people.
think oh yeah, it does, and I guess it was a question of yeah, for me, I understood from looking at things, I guess fairly early on, that you could actually get rid of the whole ethnicity system to begin with. Um, and so we basically stripped out all the ethnicity stuff for the original port of the models into remastered. And even now, although we've got ethnicity coding in with the new units, we don't have ethnic ethnicity specific models um, for our new units. They're all the same model for each of the ethnicities, but what the ethnicity system does provide is different skin colours and eye colours and hair colours. So we still benefit from that without creating a whole stack of extra work.
Right, exactly. No, I think people probably just get intimidated because it's so long. But then, once you realize you can just strip it out, especially if you're porting older units, that I think that
Yeah.
probably makes it a lot easier. And yeah, the other thing that I think a lot of people find intimidating are those PBR textures you mentioned,
Yeah.
because especially when you port old units, they weren't designed. A lot of them weren't designed with those PBRs in mind. So the PBR, as far as I understand, when you have a proper PBR texture, the Rome Remastered lighting engine can figure out how light should reflect off of like a metallic piece of armor versus leather armor versus skin, things like that. Do I get it right?
Yeah, that's right. So basically, there's three elements to the PBR. There's the normal texture, which basically, in effect, it provides some additional 3D information. Um, for example, like scale armor, although you've got a flat plane that you're texturing it onto, with the normal texture, you can make it look like individual scales. You can make stitching look like stitching, not just a flat plane. You can make embossed shield designs stand up and kind of reflect light as well, as though they're modeled in 3D. So it's like a sort of micro 3D modeling, and that's really, really effective. Yeah, I've found that really fantastic to work with. I think that, to be honest, the lighting engine, and in particular this PBR element, is um, one of the best that I've seen in the Total War series. Um, so the roughness and the metalness and the normal mapping looks really fantastic. It responds really well. So you can make metal stuff look like metal. You can make shiny things look shiny. You can make dull things look dull. You can make leather look like leather. Paint look like paint. That sort of thing. So yeah, it works really, really well.
Right. I
But
think,
yeah, it's a bit
yeah.
intimidating because you've got to what you've got to do when you start creating these things from scratch is understand how to break textures down into separate grayscale channels. So there's for me that was quite a big learn process because I'd never done that before. So it took probably a month or so of working. In fact, I spent probably the first 3 months of this year working on one single unit, um, just to try and get a lot of these processes looking right, like the PBR.
Right.
I had to do a lot of work on setting up some of the model components like line of thoraces, helmets, those things, getting understanding how they would look in the game versus in a Blender 3D modeling program. So lots of background work without much to show for it. And AHAL was kind of, you've only done one unit, you've taken 3 months. I was going, yeah, but it's all kind of getting ready to be able to then mass produce stuff after we've got a good understanding of what we're doing.
Right. Absolutely. I remember when I first saw the first ported Roma Surrectum units in RIS, and I thought, with the appropriate PBR textures that I believe Swagger was able to make, or you were able to make, I don't recall. Um, the units act, even though the textures were done with a total 2D old Rome Total War style in mind, it made the units look 3D, like the armor and things. They looked really quite nice, and the shield patterns as well. So that's some pretty cool technology, especially with the lighting. I agree with you. I think Rome Remastered has a pretty incredible lighting engine. I think it's very underappreciated. Um, compared to the lighting engine of something like Rome 2, right? Where a
Yeah.
lot of things look very plasticky to me, not very alive. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. I mean, certainly my opinion is that I think the remastered engine handles metal much better
Right.
than Rome 2 does. But I guess, it is, in a sense, it's a newer engine because they
Right, it's
rewrote a
much
lot of
newer,
it.
so that should be expected. I'm not
Yeah.
saying the Rome 2 units look bad in any respect, but you
No.
can see the advancement in that lighting
Yeah.
technology for sure. It looks nicer to me, especially, of course, this is a good segue into the Rome remastered units that you're now making for RIS, because of course it was nice to have the really nice ported units with the upscaling and all that, and that was really nice to see. And it's so great that of course it's easy to port units from Rome Total War and Rome Total War mods. But being able to make new Rome remastered units, like you said, that unit it took you 3 months to make, that was a Rome remastered style model and unit, correct?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
Right. So,
But it was
yeah,
kind
let's
of
go into
one.
that.
Yeah. So, yeah, it was a bit of a process, really. So we talked probably about this time last year about adding, once we understood that the unit variety thing had been unlocked, we started thinking about how we were going to handle that. Because suddenly our work potentially had gone up 7 times. If you got 7 variants per unit, suddenly you're looking at not just how many hundred units, you're looking at several thousand unit variants.
Hmm.
And so that was a bit daunting. And we started off thinking, okay, well, let's just start by creating some shields. So the I can't remember which release it was. Was it 0.4? I think was looking at it. It
I
basically brought
believe
in
so.
some shield variants, but Carthage, some of the Spanish units, Rome, Macedon, and I think that was probably about it. Just as a sort of, I guess to whet people's appetite a little bit as to what the potential was. Because I think there'd been a fair bit of disappointment with Remastered about, you know, yeah, I think quite a lot of people were disappointed that it wasn't really that exciting, and we wanted to show the potential of it as a platform for modders. So the quick thing was to put out a whole stack of shield variants because you can do those fairly quickly, and then I kind of thought, okay, so ultimately we want to be creating new units that make use of the higher poly capabilities, and that means sort of designing stuff from the ground up, not just rehashing old elements. I think at that stage we'd probably got a guy called Grimbold on, who is a 3D modeler. He'd recently joined the team, and I said, "Oh, yeah, it'd be great if you could model some of these Hellenistic helmets for us." So he kind of got going with those, and his skills have just kind of, they've blossomed and mushroomed as part of the team. It's really exciting seeing some of the stuff that he's producing now through sculpting and
Hmm.
creating high resolution 3D models where he's putting sort of millions of vertices in and then baking those into a low poly model. So going from maybe 6 million vertices down to, let's say, 1,000 for a helmet, but you get all of the richness of that detail into the helmet. So he started creating some of the Hellenistic helmets. There's a guy called El Santo Padre who created the first of the shoulder armor bit for the line of thorax, and he also created the first set of pterygies. And then since then, I've added some variants to those, different shapes, different lengths of pterygies, etc. So yeah, it's been quite a process of learning how to make all of that stuff fit together. And what I guess from my experience working with RS2 of reinventing the wheel multiple times for different units, I guess part of the principle I thought we needed to adopt was very much a modular design where we could swap helmets, swap armor bits, swap swords, shields in between different unit variants, in between different units, without having to redo all of the what's called UV mapping. So UV mapping is basically how the unit texture fits onto the unit model. So let's say so in our textures, I said, okay, so the torso is going to be top left, the shield will be top right, the helmet will be bottom right, the leg bits will be bottom left, that kind of thing. And so they've each got their own little area on the overall unit texture for them to sit, and it makes that swapping process really, really easy. The other thing that I did fairly early on was start creating this sort of library of unit components, again, so that we could swap stuff between models really reasonably easily. And that's really how we've managed to get, thousands of unit textures, hundreds of models, I think 500 line of thoracy variants, line of thorax variants done in the last probably 4 months. And using some guys who've had very little experience of doing 3D or texturing, because I've been able to create some sort of texturing templates for them to work on, which basically means it's almost like a sort of color by numbers process for them. And they've, as they've been doing that, their skills have developed to the point where one of them is now starting to model helmets. The other guy, one of the other guys, is getting really confident, producing some beautiful line of thorax textures. So yeah, it's sort of trying to cater for that mass production process, and that's been that was again part of the 3-month setup in getting going.
Yeah, no, like that process has definitely borne fruit. Your 3 months of labor just working on that one unit, because, like you said, you've been able to pump out quite a lot of content um, since that time. And of course, not just you, but you were able to make the process easy for newcomers, right? Who were able to join the team. A lot of people, of course, since I've been working on the port of Chivalry and trying to enhance that old mod, a lot of people ask me, "Oh, well, why don't you add this faction?" And I say, "Well, I don't have the units." And then they say, "Well, oh, that's too bad." And I say, "But if you join the team, and you help me, we can maybe make some units for them." And, a lot of people get intimidated by that. They say, "Oh, I don't know how to do that." And, that's something that I think you've done a really good job at making accessible for new artists. I think you might agree. Um, because you said how many team members have joined who didn't have previous 2D art experience?
So probably 3 of the guys working in the team. Exy, who's now done pretty much all of the level of detail work. So that's basically creating. So in addition to the sort of 350 units, each of those has got 4 levels of detail, which basically mean that it uses less resource the further away from the unit you're viewing it. So at sort of, is it 60 meters? I think it is. It starts. There are. It changes from having sort of 9,000 vertices per unit down to a few hundred, which basically means that your computer can cope with a lot more units on the screen.
Right.
So he came in, hadn't done any of that stuff before, fairly quickly got the hang of swapping parts between models, and then actually out of his passion for seeing the game playing really smoothly, said, "Can I start working on levels of detail?" I said, "Sure, yeah." And fortunately, Blender has got a really good function called Decimate in it, which basically is a very intelligent algorithm that basically just shrinks the detail down. It takes out redundant vertices out of the model. And so you can just say, right, I want a model now that's sort of got 10% of the detail that the previous one had, and it will do it for you, and you can export that. So that's been quite a smooth process, and that didn't exist back in the old Rome Total War days, the original game. So he came on board, got excited about doing some of the work, and yeah, has been very passionate about getting the levels of detail work done. Refract came in, hadn't done any graphic work before, has probably done most of our line authorities, most of the 500, I would say. I would say he's probably done about 400 of those, working off templates. But now I think he's got a really good understanding of graphics, and is I don't need to give him much direction, which is great. So yeah, it's a great opportunity for people to learn, skills, learn as part of a team. We talk together, we share learning, we share experience, we share the stuff that we've got in development. We provide feedback to each other. So a really good learning environment. So if there are people who are wanting to get into it and are passionate and have got some time to give, then it's a really great place to learn.
Right, absolutely. I think that's one of the most. I think that's one of your greatest initiatives as part of RIS is sort of initiating these new artist modders, because that's something that's really, I think, been lacking in the wider Rome Remastered community. It's always been somewhat tough to find artists to work on units, models, textures, buildings, things of that nature from the old days. But I feel like nowadays that maybe I don't know, maybe the programs are a little more intimidating. But a lot of people are a little intimidated by the initial learning curve and uh, don't really want to jump into that. Do you think
Yeah,
that's correct?
yeah. Oh yeah, massively. Yeah, I think people are really intimidated by programs like GIMP or Photoshop or Blender.
Blender, yeah.
There's so much to them, and just by sort of creating some simple tasks for people. So the first thing I got people to do was just I provided a tutorial on how to assemble a unit from the different component parts, and that people were able to follow that reasonably easily. I gave them a tutorial. I basically created the template files for some tunics, and so they were able just to take the template, recolor the tunic, add some stripes to it really easily, and that they gradually grew in their skills and their confidence in being able to work with these different files.
Right. That's
And
yeah.
as part of that, they then feel quite excited about seeing some of the stuff that they've created in the game, in the mod. So that's the benefit, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the greatest things is being able to welcome in modders who are interested in becoming, artists and get into it in more depth, and then they come out an excellent modder. That's really, really an unprecedented thing in the modding community. That's pretty nice to see. Yeah, I think that's been a pretty great introduction here to the next version of RIS and the whole history of the unit development process for um, Imperium Surrectum. This has been really great. So, do you have any concluding thoughts you'd like to share?
Yeah, probably. I haven't
Of
really
course.
thought about this too much, but yeah, I think we're all learning, aren't we? I'm learning constantly from seeing stuff being produced by other people, by facing new challenges. Yeah, how do I make something look more realistic? Um, so that's something that also how do I make the whole process smoother and more streamlined? So I've learned, yeah, a huge ton of stuff over this last 6 months that I didn't have a clue about back in the Roma Surrectum time. Um, things like use of layers, layer groups, layer masks in GIMP. So I basically use only free tools, and the just how to do all of that stuff using paths and all sorts of other things using color palettes. So when Balbor Valis, who's one of the other new guys, came in, he got some experience of doing some stuff for the Fourth Age Total War,
Oh,
and
right.
has been a real sort of powerhouse in the team in helping us get organised and a lot of the spreadsheets and stuff that we work from he put together and have been very much sort of behind that sort of high level organisational bit as well as producing a lot of the unit textures from templates and other components. Yeah, really fantastic guy. So yeah, I think a lot of this is about getting organised and learning as you go along, learning from other people. Don't make the same mistakes twice. Ask questions from other modders, how they're doing stuff. Um, think about where you want to get to, and sometimes taking the shortcut doesn't pay in the long run. So again, going back to that 3 month setup period, um, it wasn't the shortcut. It was the long way around. But ultimately, it ends up being quicker because we can then scale up quicker. But yeah,
Right.
I think we love. I think all of us involved in the RTR Imperium Surrectum mod, we're just sort of massive enthusiasts. We're really passionate about what we do. We love bringing history to life. What I've loved is working with some of the historians in the team, and the depth of knowledge that they've got, and they'll kind of say, well, you need this helmet, and here's a coin with the that you should be using for this phalanx unit or whatever, and I'll go away and go, okay, so how can I bring that history to life? And for me, that's the really exciting thing about this is that sort of real archaeology component to it. Love it.
Right, absolutely. Something I've really been liking about the. Of course, this was also present in Roma Surrectum, but especially here, especially with the new lighting, is the colors, the colorful units. A lot of people have this misconception that realistic means, you know, grimy, gray, brown colors. But that's not true. That's really not true. And I think the
Yeah,
RAS units show that, especially the new ones.
yeah, yeah. So we've taken a lot of inspiration from things like tomb paintings, and also some of the stuff that's on friezes. They've been able to look at the colours that were used on friezes and tomb paintings and so on. And there's a lot of colour. You go into some of those Thracian and Macedonian tombs, and you see the bright helmets, the colourful shields, the line of thoraces, even that aren't all white. You'll see purple and blue and red and that kind of thing on some of those. So that's been very much an inspiration.
Right, absolutely. Well, well, Tone, I think this has been a very enlightening interview. Of course, I've always been. Actually, I think this is a good example of progression here. You were the excellent head unit maker for Roma Surrectum, and I was actually there back in the old days. I was just one of the historians on the team, even though I was just a kid
You
at the
were, yeah, yeah,
time. I was just a kid at the time. I was a
yeah,
young teenager. But I think
yeah, cool.
we show good progression now. You're making now thousands more units than you ever thought you could, and with variants and things like that. And I actually was able to port a couple of mods with help, of course. For Rome Remastered, I think that's quite nice to see that progression there. Um,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Time goes by, doesn't it? Yeah.
right, I know. In any case, Tone, thank you for joining us today. I know that was quite enlightening for me. I've always been more of a campaign mechanics guy, figuring out the context for the battles and all that. But you've really always been the guy who makes the battles come alive with the excellent units and art. And really, without that, um, I think both are necessary, of course, but without that, it takes a lot of talent, and you've got it. That's for sure. That's for sure. Yeah. So thanks for joining, Tone, and yeah, maybe we can have you on next time when they up the variant numbers to 20, and who knows what limits are lifted.
Yeah,
All right.
hilarious.
Well,
Okay, yeah, my pleasure. Yeah, you take care.
you take care as well, Tone, and I'll
And
see
thanks.
you all in the
Yeah, thanks
next
for the
one.
invite. All
All
right.
right. Bye bye.